What's up, nerds? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about kayaks versus used boats, be it a bass boat or tin boat or whatever. It's a topic that comes up a lot because if you've been a part of our channel for any amount of time, in this community, we talk about kayaks a lot. When we go to ICAST, we run right to the kayaks and we look at all the new stuff and we get excited about it. And as we post about those, sometimes the price tag goes up and then people go,
Always the price tag goes up. And the price tag in our kayaks has slowly gone up and up and up. You know, you get into the higher end electronics, more rod holders, nicer boxes, the price tag has gone up.
So bottom line, a question a lot of folks have is, why would I spend over $1,000 on a plastic flotation vessel when I could purchase a tin or fiberglass version of that with much more space and more speed?
And what we're talking about typically is going to be a used Jon Boat, or a much older used bass boat that's probably in the 16 to 14, like smaller range.
Yep.
So I just want to be clear about that because there's no question that while kayak prices have gone up and electronics have gone up, the price on bass boats has skyrocketed. We're talking about what people used to talk of as like the top end of like a super nice bass boat was like, you have a $50,000 bass boat. That's crazy.
It's
now
now
we're
100.
talking, you have a $120,000 bass boat. How nice. So those are not, we're not even going to cover that here. What we're talking about is like a 2000s, like, you know, 10 to 15 year old, at least used bass boat versus a probably the same age range, but potentially a little newer Jon Boat, which it would be like an aluminum 14 to 18 foot open concept Jon Boat with a gas, maybe electric, but probably a gas motor.
So the question comes up most often when you start looking at kayaks that cost upwards of $2,000. So we get into the 2,000 plus range, usually talking pedal. Maybe you get into like your Old Town Sportsman autopilot, for example. So maybe there's a motor, maybe you purchase a motor, you got a XI3 bow mount, you got a Newport NK300 off the back of it. You're using micro power poles. We're gonna get into a lot of that stuff here in this video. But the point is you're decking it out. So chances are once you make these upgrades, you get sonar on there, you're at $5,000 to $10,000.
Not a used, a brand new kayak, all the goods, like all the rod holders, the anchor wizard,
crate,
the
motor,
crate, all of those little accessories, plus high-end electronics. We're not talking about a Lowrance hook shot that's $300 used. We're talking about a 9 to 10 inch Garmin, Lowrance unit, maybe even forward-facing sonar, and then we're talking about at least some kind of motor. So we're talking about, like Jeff said, something on the back, like a heavy-duty motor that's, you know, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000, or we're talking about a bow mount, or maybe both. That's where you get into like the $10,000 to $15,000 range. So that's the kayak we're talking about. Basically, the best one you can build, the highest end for the kayak market. That's really the only competing kayak that can compete with the Jon Boat side. On the Jon Boat side, we're talking likely used. We're talking about it's got some modifications to it, so it's got the rod holders you want, it's got some form of electronics, and then it has a gas motor. It may have a trolling motor, but likely at that price range, probably doesn't, or if it doesn't, it's not of a super high quality, right? We're talking about something that's been beat on, and that's what you're getting potentially for that $10,000 range. And again, that's probably in the middle end of the used Jon Boat market.
Yeah, in the used Jon Boat market for $5,000, you can probably get
a boat and a motor.
You got a boat, a motor, and then if you want to add a trolling motor, the Motor Guide XI3 is like $1,500. So you could get that, and you could mod out your Jon Boat. Don't get me wrong, like you could do all these things.
And they're sick. This is not crap talking custom Jon Boats because they're dope, but they have a totally different offering, and that's what we want to walk through is what can you get for, we'll call it $10,000. What can you get for 10 grand on the new kayak market versus what can you get for $10,000 on the Jon Boat market, and how are those things different? And then where do you end up at the end?
You could buy a new tracker. Is it like the 14 foot or 17 foot, whatever? The one that Cabela's and Bass Pro Shops always talked about, that's like 16, 17 grand. That'd be brand
just for
new.
that. Like no accessories.
No, nothing on it. Yeah, exactly. So who are we to talk about this subject? Well, we have owned both high-end and low-end kayaks, and we have also both had used Jon Boats, boats that we picked up somewhere on like Facebook Marketplace or wherever, and that we modded out, upgraded, took care of our motors, you know,
sold.
Dealt with all that, and then got rid of. Like, we got rid of them for a reason. Now, again, if you're a Jon Boat guy or if you're a used bass boat guy, like, this video is not against you whatsoever. We actually want to go through some pros and and cons of kayaks and these used Jon or bass boats.
And I think the basis for this video is the person who is a Jon Boat owner or is not a kayak fisherman and sees us spending a bunch of money on those kayaks and with like malintent is like, why would you ever do that when you could do this? Implied, you idiot. That's the comment that we're trying to address. So again, no hate towards the Jon Boat guys, no hate towards the expensive bass or kayak guys, or the cheap on either end, right?
Yeah.
On our channel, it's do it. We're not yucking your yum. Do whatever you want. As long as you're doing the same thing for everybody else, we are all cool. Yucking yum, not here.
Don't yuck other people's yum. All right, so let's get into the pros and cons. We'll start with kayaks, for example. So we'll start with the pros. The pros of a kayak, I mean, number one, they're super quiet, even with those motors. I mean, a lot of those electric motors are as quiet, if not more quiet than your standard trolling motors that you've got on your Jon or bass boats. So you're stealthy. You've got an easier access to waters and access to waters that boat guys can't even go on. There's a lot of no motors allowed waters, no wake zones. Like I can go there with my kayak and those guys can't.
Also trim, right? So your drafting is much lower than a boat. So, you know, if you need to get over a 4-inch deep water or 1-inch deep water, I can get out of my kayak in that scenario and walk to my spot and then get back in my kayak. So, you know, that's been a known factor and what some people perceive to be a benefit for kayaks just in general compared to boats.
I can do a river trip, I can pull out at a dam, drop in below the dam, I've got more access. So that's one big thing to consider. There's obviously a con to that we'll get to later.
And we're talking about pedals. So with a kayak, even a really expensive one, you don't necessarily have to have a motor to make it very effective. With a Jon Boat, no one is paddling Jon Boats. The number of people paddling a 14+ foot Jon Boat with all the stuff in it is like, there's one guy. And he'll be in the comments, I'm sure, but it's just not done because it's not efficient. And they're not comparable. A pedal kayak versus a rowboat, they're not in the same galaxy. So you also have that opportunity with a kayak too.
And that's not to mention like this fly fishing specific rafts and skiffs and stuff where they purposefully are using oars. That's part of how it works. Those are also not cheap. Very expensive.
All the stuff you can get is the market for kayaks is also just like skyrocketing. So your ability to get forward-facing sonar all day, every day. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Your ability to get the trolling motor on the front, that's there with a remote and just have spot lock and everything else. And then same thing with electric motors. It's opening up this whole new world where now you can be competitive. Not really. You can't be competitive speed-wise, but your reach, right, with a kayak is definitely there with the new electric motors and the batteries, the lithium-ion batteries that are available for the kayak market.
And mounting options for those and other accessories are unlimited and included most of the time. You already got track mounts, you got bungees, you got tie downs, you got motor mounting plates, you got the 4-bolt pattern for that power pole helped bring to the market, which is now being used for things like your Newports, your Torqeedos,
Bixby's,
quick release bow mount motors. I mean,
power poles, you name it.
And it's all like either stock or pretty affordable to add those accessories. The accessory itself, like the motor, is not necessarily going to be cheap, but like the mounting brackets and things that you need are either included or cheap.
I think weight, storage, transportation,
all in one big
all can be considered benefits in most cases for these huge kayaks. Like to think that you could have a 300-pound kayak, like fully loaded out with all your stuff, every rod you own, all your drinks and snacks and electronics and batteries, and then that all can be supported by 2 wheels that are also traveling with you on the kayak and can be transported maybe with a bed extender on a 14+ foot model in the back of a truck with no trailer is completely insane. Like compare that to, you must have a trailer for a Jon Boat 99.9% of the time. Those things are not comparable. Also storage-wise, it's just a smaller package. So storing in a garage, totally normal. You're probably not even taking up a parking bay in your garage because we have done that for years. So that is also typically considered a pro for kayaks.
Not to mention that everything's going to be electric on a kayak and not gas powered, so you don't have to deal with gas. You're not buying it, you're not using it.
You're not running out of it.
You're not running out of it, you're not having issues with fuel injection lines and spark plugs and things that go bad on motors.
And maybe having no other option. A lot of Jon Boats, the only way you get around is with the big motor versus in a kayak. Even if you have a motor, typically you're going to have the pedal option as well. So that's just, you know, you're not SOL if you run out of battery.
Fair enough. There's also a lot to be said about maneuverability. Even if I have a pedal kayak, oftentimes I also have a paddle with me. Maybe I got a motor, maybe I've got foot steering with that motor, so I can maneuver through tight quarters, shallow water. I can turn faster. I can do all sorts of stuff. Now, I can't travel necessarily faster. That's on the cons list.
Facts.
But I can maneuver very quickly and nimbly. I'm nimbly.
And that's while you're fishing too, right? You get to a spot and you're like, okay, I just want to like turn this way to fish this area. It takes a half a second. It's pretty easy. Versus if you've got a full motor and you're in the Jon Boat, maybe you have to go all the way to the back of the boat and actually like maybe make an awkward cast. Or you're just drifting and you're like, no, I got to start the motor and I got to go up this way and I got to turn it off and turn and drift down. Like, it's just different.
What you get for what you spend. When we compare these, when anybody compares these in the comments, what they're really talking about is like this $5,000 to $10,000 kayak versus this $5,000 to $10,000 boat. What you get for $5,000 to $10K in a kayak, it's hard to argue against. It's all brand new high-end stuff. So you get like the cream of the crop of the kayaks. And for the boats, you get more of the lower end.
Used. It's stuff that's been beat on a lot of times. So, and then when you decide to go used in the kayak market, you can save like 50%. Like when I go and buy a
couple years older.
A used Native Titan, it's maybe 2/3 the price or half the price. A lot of times, market dependent, but typically you're getting a really big discount. So could you build a super nice kayak on the cheap, just like we're talking about with the used Jon Boat market?
Yep.
Absolutely. And we recommend that on this channel all of the time. We talk about new stuff all the time, but a lot of times in the same breath I'll say, but yeah, you could go get a used Old Town and save $1,000, right? So there's always that.
So that totally changes the conversation as well.
So when we talk about the price ranges, what we're really talking about is when I am in the high-end kayak market, at the very top of the price range, that's like the $10,000 to $12,000 range typically, that gets you like the nicest of the nice, the best of the best. Versus that $10,000 to $12,000 in the boat market, you're already in the used lower end of that boat market, typically, right? And that's why it's a little bit apples to oranges.
So, and again, we've got personal experience in both sides of this. We have built out Hobie Pro Angler 360s, which
14-footer, yeah.
It was around 12 to 14 grand to do the builds
with
that
forward-facing sonar, yeah.
We made those, got rid of it. I'm getting a Native Titan X. I'm going to build the crap out of that one. That'll be like an $8,000 to $9,000 build.
And that's a dual motor, forward-facing sonar, Garmin 9SV, like super high-end, and you're under the $10,000 range, and you're getting what is effectively the best available kayak on the market right now.
And you could also just buy a lot of the stuff used. So I mean, if you go to like the older Native Slayers that you were talking about, or Titans,
similar,
save a couple $1,000. You get an old Hobie Pro Angler, you can save a couple $1,000.
Get a used electronics unit, save another $500.
Yeah, a lot of people have them already built because it was like a hobby, and they quit the hobby, so they're just like, here's my pre-built rig for $7,000 when it was 14 grand to build. But let's get into the cons with kayaks.
There are some cons. There are things that have always bothered us. Let's hit them.
So first of all, unless you get a tandem kayak, you have one person in the boat.
And it's tight quarters.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what kayak you're in. Some feel more spacious. It's tight quarters. It's hip to hip. The widest kayak available right now, I think it's like 42 to 44 inches, something like that.
Canoe Unlimited,
that's like one of the widest ones available. Most of them are in the, even like stand-up kayaks are in the 32 to 36 inch wide range.
Yep.
Once you get your butt in there, there's not a lot of elbow room, right? So you are confined.
That's because everything is where you need it, which is also kind of a pro con. So it's like small, but I can reach everything I need.
But I can't put my kids in there. So there's absolutely that. Like standing up and moving around is not an option in a kayak for the most part.
Stability is a part of that too. So if I get a narrower, built for speed kayak standing up, not an option, because I'm going to tip over and fall. A lot of kayaks nowadays, though, they do have secondary and tertiary stability even. So while it feels unstable, it's not likely to tip. But of course, it happens.
And it's not comfortable. It's not like being in a Jon Boat. When I'm in a Jon Boat, I can do jumping jacks. It's not an issue, right? I can go like back to back with somebody and be casting around.
Yep. Another big issue is speed. I'm not going to go as fast as you if you have an outboard motor.
Period. The end. That leads to range. My range in a Jon Boat is like literally 10x what it is in a kayak. Not to mention, like Jeff said, the speed, I can get there in a couple minutes versus like 45 minutes. There's a huge difference in speed and range on a gas motor, even or a high-end electric motor on a Jon Boat, than there is with a kayak.
And if I'm paddling or pedaling, I'm also tired and sweaty by the time I get there. So having that big outboard, it definitely opens up big water. Whereas
100%.
with a kayaker, you have to be smart about where you drop in. So what boat ramp I go to. We fished a gigantic body of water in Alabama.
And we were almost late for checkout because it took forever to get back. So there is a ton.
I was sweating.
You were just hoofing it.
Yeah.
100%. Another con is we talked about how this is less expensive. That doesn't mean it's free. You're still paying for the dang thing. And 8 to 10 grand, that's no joke. That's big money. Like, don't care who you are. That's big money for something that is effectively a hobby for a lot of people. So
for one person.
Yeah.
So if you're like us and your dad's...
I just spent 10 grand to not hang out with my... Wait a minute. Is this a good thing or a bad? It's a pro or a con?
Whoa.
It's a
if
pro-con.
my wife is watching, it's a con.
But seriously, you just paid a bunch of money to have to go by yourself. With the Jon Boat, it can be a fun thing for your family or your friends to go do with, and you really can't do that with a kayak. So that is a huge con.
It's a selfish hobby.
It sure is.
We know.
Storage as well. So the amount of stuff that I can bring in a Jon Boat is 10x what it is in a kayak. So number of rods. They may have rod lockers in the dang Jon Boat, and I could fit 30 or 40 in there. I could fit 20 of mine and 20 of my buddies, right? If I want to bring a cooler, not a big deal. Done. If I want to go, you know, bring, again, we talked about having like kids or a dog or family, they're coming with you, no questions asked. That's the whole darn point. If I want to go, you know, bring in all the electronics and I want to walk around on deck and do all that kind of stuff, it's not an issue in the Jon Boat. So you have way more space and then the stability that goes along with it to make it super comfortable.
And one more con that I'll throw out to you guys is loading and unloading a kayak is a little bit different than loading and unloading a boat. So you don't always have a trailer. A lot of guys nowadays, especially if they're running motors, they're just so heavy, so bulky, they run a trailer, which changes this a little bit. However, boats are a lot more accustomed to keeping everything on deck. So I can leave all my rod combos in the boat when I travel because I can just strap them down with a bungee. I can leave all my tackle boxes in there, especially if you have any storage lockers on board.
Lockable.
But even most of the time, even if it's all open Jon Boat, I can just lay everything down, strap a bungee over top, and it's gonna be fine. With a kayak, while some have in-hull rod storage, like the Titan X or the Hobies, for example.
Not all of them do.
Not all of them do. In fact, most of them don't. So keeping your rods on deck while driving down the road is not always advised. And then tackle boxes, if they're sitting in a tackle crate, for example, if you have a lid, maybe you're okay with that, leaving it on there. Your motors, oftentimes you don't want to drive with those fully attached.
You're also talking about like 4 tackle boxes versus 12 tackle boxes, right?
So.
And then, you know, the other thing I will say too, though, but Jeff mentioned it, and I'm kind of going backwards a little bit, but we go back to the storage thing versus transportation. If you live in an apartment or somewhere where you don't have space for a boat, it's so much harder to break down Jon Boat. And this is why I got rid of mine. I lived in an apartment, I had to park it outside, and there was like risks at all times that someone would like come and steal stuff, so I had it like chained up. I had to take this 1950s Johnson and a friggin' gas tank off it every time, and then the battery, and then the electronics, and then all the rods, and then all the baits, and all of a sudden it was like, this doesn't make any sense. Versus the kayak, I could literally carry it around to the back of my apartment. I didn't even tie it up. It was just like, you know, back there. So that made it, you know, again, back to the storage versus transportation. Most times, storage you win with the kayak, but stuff and transportation you win with the Jon Boat.
So let's go to the used boats now. We're talking again, if you can get, whether it's a used Jon Boat, sometimes you can find used bass boats. A lot of time they're like 1987 Skeeters. Or
you're talking about a much, much older boat.
95 tracker.
Yeah, that doesn't have all the stuff, or really the space. You're gonna have to lose a lot of the length on that boat, and you're gonna lose, to get the price down, you're gonna lose a lot of the horsepower on the motor.
So let's start with the pros. There's more room, a lot of it.
Generally,
you can put multiple people on that boat, 3, 4, 5, whatever, depending on the size you get.
Big open deck that you can walk in on, and in the back, you can usually fold the seats down. You've got a rear deck as well for your co-angler or your bud or your whoever.
So all boats have like a little warning sticker that shows you their weight capacity and occupant capacity. So kayaks, unless they're a tandem, it's always 1. If they're a tandem, it's 2. If you're in a Jon Boat, bass boat, generally it's 3, 4, maybe 5, depending on the size.
Highest weight capacity in a kayak is like 500
pounds.
That's like the absolute highest. Most of them are in the 400-pound range for the sit-on top ones. Totally different. You don't even really have to consider the issue with a boat. So that is a huge win on space and weight capacity.
Like speed we talked about, and water coverage. If I have an outboard, I can cover more water than you, and I can go faster than you if you're in a kayak.
You can
it's just reality.
You can also handle much more. We talked about stability, the adverse weather conditions. So rougher water, squall pops up. It's much less of a big deal in a boat than as a kayak. In a kayak, I'm eyeballing the sky at all times, and I'm like, do I need to get out of here today? Probably.
We have to make tough choices and dip out sometimes.
Wind. In a boat, your biggest problem with wind, in most instances, is going to be, oh, I can't cast as well. Versus in the kayak, I'm like, bro, I might get ejected from my kayak.
I can't do anything.
There's always that.
Another big one we've been talking about back and forth here is tackle storage, rod and reel storage, equipment.
50 versus 6.
I can have so much more in a boat. That just is facts, bro.
Cooler versus no cooler, more electronics versus less electronics. We're done. We get it.
And then you could also look at a trailer as a pro for the boats, because oftentimes you can get really nice trailers and I don't have to,
load and unload.
Yeah, like my kayak, it goes up in my truck bed, and then when I get home, it goes off onto a kayak cart. That cart goes off to the side of my garage.
Got all the stuff,
If I got a trailer for my boat, I back the trailer into the garage and I disconnect.
Bye.
And then launching a boat, we already talked about, can be a lot easier. Everything's already ready to go. You launch on the water and you're good. On a kayak, I have to like take everything out, put everything back in when I get to the ramp and when I get home.
The last thing I will say about cons on a boat versus pros on a kayak. What do people talk about with boats all the time? Break out another 1,000. When there's a problem, it's a big problem. If I got a hole in my boat, it's a huge problem. If I get a hole in my kayak, not really a big problem, and not an expensive fix. If I have a wiring issue with my electronics in a kayak, it might be a little hard to get to, but it's not usually a gigantic problem, and it's not an expensive fix. On the boat side, it could be massive. And so the break out another 1,000 thing, when it comes to motors, big gas motors, that I'm already like, fart. Versus with the kayak, an electric motor, totally different. So they're not the same long-term maintenance between boat versus kayak.
Yeah. Maintenance is huge. You're going to have a lot more maintenance on your trailer, on your motors, on your boat, on the electronics.
Like bearing buddies. I'm like, install. Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, it's a problem.
That's not a thing you can argue. Like, there is a lot more maintenance that goes into a boat versus a kayak.
They both need maintenance. The levels are not the same.
Yeah, I could just be mean to my kayak, and I usually am. Never clean it, never do a darn thing, and it'll be totally fine.
Put a little epoxy on it, heat it up, boom, done, fixed it.
Yeah, if there's a hole in your hull, you can just patch it. We've seen it done, tournament.
And you can patch a boat hull, it's just not the same.
A lot of the cons for the boats we also already talked about when we were talking about the kayaks. So what can you get for the price range? It's totally different, boat versus kayak. Your storage, you do have to store a full-on boat. So if you live in the apartment, that can be a challenge, obviously.
16-foot trailer is the standard for a shorter trailer.
Yeah,
14-foot with a folding arm, you can get 12 if you're lucky, but it's long.
I had a trailer for my John. I had to disconnect it at my house, and then I walked it to the side of my garage because it was in the grass.
Classic.
To get it out of the way. So yeah, I mean, you got all sorts of stuff like that.
So what is the actual take, right? When you take into account all the pros and all the cons of both Jon Boats and kayaks, right? Now, again, we're responding to that comment that's like, I'm assuming it's somebody who owns a boat or is neither owner and is like, why would I ever buy a kayak when I could get a Jon Boat?
To be fair, there's an argument to be made, but the way that most folks approach this in the comments
is the unsaid "you idiot" for the person who spent a bunch of money on a kayak, right?
Yep.
So after
not cool.
Yeah. So after going through those pros and cons, I would say this: if you're somebody who fishes by yourself primarily, if you're somebody who doesn't want to pay quite as much money but have the most high-end equipment, if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of space, or if you're somebody who primarily fishes smaller waters, like if you're a pond hopper, river fisherman, or just like small to medium-sized lake fisherman, I truly believe that the kayak is the better choice for you. Now, if you're somebody who fishes with multiple people, if you're somebody who has a lot of space to store something, or if you're somebody who's like, look, I'm going to get a pretty nice boat and then maybe I'm going to save up and add stuff to it slowly over time, or if you've owned a boat in the past and that's how you enjoy fishing, I think a boat is absolutely the right move for you. But I don't think that there's a question about higher end price range of kayaks gets you so much more value and ends up only hitting like the lower used market of a Jon Boat with not nearly as much accoutrement and stuff. So if range is important to you, basically I'm saying go boat. If range is not as important to you and like having high quality electronics and pond hopping and river fishing is important to you, go kayak. So this is not a yuck yum. I'm not telling any single person that what the decision that they made for themselves is wrong.
Yeah.
And I just think that those are the sort of facts of the situation. And there's not really a wrong choice. You got to make the right one for you.
Yep. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We had a fun time arguing both points, and if you like content like this, we'll consider making more of it. So smash that like and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you so much, and we'll catch you on the next video.
Goodbye.